My name is Sylvia Owens, and I'm 28 years old. If you ask anyone who knows me well, they'll probably tell you I've always craved peace more than excitement. Not because I'm boring or lacking ambition, but because I grew up in a house where chaos was normal, where shouting matches echoed through thin walls and slammed doors were the punctuation to every argument. When I was younger, I used to press my palms against my ears and whisper promises to myself. When I'm older, I will never live like this. My love, my home will be steady. That promise shaped me. Stability became my definition of love. Reliability, my version of romance. I thought I was building exactly that with Peter. We met through mutual friends at a dinner party. He was magnetic that night, telling stories, making people laugh, effortlessly pulling people into his orbit. But what struck me wasn't his charm. It was how, in the quiet moments, he seemed to admire my steadiness. While everyone else drank too much and flirted, he leaned closer and said, "You're the calmest person here. It's grounding." I felt seen, and for a long time I thought that was love. In the beginning, he'd tell his friends how lucky he was to have me. Sylvia's the rock, he'd brag. She's the one I can rely on, and I wore that role proudly. I'd pick him up from work after late shifts when his car was in the shop, cook for him when he was buried in projects, even run errands for him just to make his days easier. It never felt like a sacrifice. I wasn't keeping score. To me, that's just what you do when you love someone. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, his tone changed. The things he once praised me for became ammunition for little jokes. "You're like an old soul," he'd tease with a laugh when I suggested staying in and cooking dinner instead of going out. "God, Sylvia, you're such a grandma sometimes," he'd smirk, scrolling through his phone. At first, I brushed it off. Couples tease, lovers joke. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being playful. His words started to sting. They weren't jokes anymore. They were digs. I started noticing things I couldn't unsee. His phone, for instance. He used to leave it lying face up on the counter while he cooked or while we watched TV. I could have scrolled through it then, and he wouldn't have cared, but suddenly it was glued to his hand, face down on the table, tilted away from my line of sight every time a notification buzzed. One night I saw a name flash across the screen, a woman's name I didn't recognize. The way he shoved it into his pocket so fast my stomach knotted. "Who's that?" I asked, keeping my voice calm even. He didn't even blink. "Coworker." "Chill, Sylvia. You're being paranoid." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But that word paranoid lodged like a splinter under my skin. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying his tone in my head. He hadn't just denied it. He'd dismissed me. Like I was ridiculous for even asking. And worse, like my feelings weren't worth a real answer. I told myself not to push. I wasn't going to be the controlling girlfriend I had once sworn I'd never become. So I let it go. Or at least I tried. But red flags have a way of stacking, don't they? There were other comments too, like the way he'd point out men we passed on the street. "That guy's built. You should think about lifting more, it looks good on you." Or how he dressed up more for guys' nights than he ever did for dates with me. The more he chipped away, the more invisible I began to feel. One evening, we were on the couch, him scrolling endlessly through his phone, me finishing up some reports for work. I decided to finally test the waters. "Peter," I began, carefully. "Do you feel like we're on the same page about the future?" He barely looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, us? Where this is going. I just feel like I'm putting in a lot to make sure we're solid, but sometimes I wonder if you even want the same things." He gave this little laugh, sharp and dismissive, the kind that tells you your words don't carry weight. "Sylvia, you overthink everything. We're fine. Just enjoy it. Stop trying to plan every detail like you're some middle-aged mom." I sat in silence, the sound of his scrolling filling the room. That was the night I realized the cracks weren't small anymore. They were widening. And sooner or later, something inside this relationship was going to snap. The following weeks blurred into a strange rhythm, him half present me, half doubting myself. Peter had this way of turning my steadiness into a flaw, like he wanted me to feel small for the very things he once called rare. God. "Sylvia, do you ever get tired of being so safe?" he muttered one night when I suggested a quiet dinner at home instead of another bar crawl. I laughed lightly to soften the sting, but my chest tightened. Safe. The word that once meant comfort now sounded like an insult. I tried not to overreact, but the digs kept coming. "Sometimes I think you're more like a routine than a girlfriend. You're predictable. Do you ever do anything spontaneous?" Each sentence felt like a small hammer against the walls of our relationship. The secrecy didn't help. He'd angle his phone away as though a text contained state secrets. He'd take calls outside on the balcony, lowering his voice when I approached, and his late nights grew longer. When I asked if he wanted to plan a trip together, just the two of us, maybe somewhere coastal where we could reset, he chuckled without looking up from his phone. Sylvia, relax. Why are you always planning for some imaginary future? Can't we just live? It wasn't the words themselves that broke me. It was the casual tone, the dismissal like my hopes were trivial. I started withdrawing silently. My heart still wanted to believe he loved me, but my mind began whispering truths I didn't want to face. The biggest betrayal wasn't the hidden texts or his late nights. It was how invisible I felt. One Friday, he came home, smelling of cologne I hadn't bought him, grinning, like he'd just lived a scene out of someone else's story. "Big client dinner," he said quickly before I could ask. I nodded, but something in me knew better. His tie was loosened, his shirt untucked in a way that didn't scream client dinner. I stayed up that night, staring at the clock while the city outside pulsed with life. My phone screen lit up at midnight, his message, "Don't wait up," crashing at Jason's. Jason, his coworker, the perfect cover. But as I set the phone down, my hands shook. It wasn't the first time, but it was the first time I couldn't lie to myself. I thought of my childhood then, the shouting, the slammed doors, and the promise I'd made to my younger self, to never live like that. Yet here I was, not with noise, but with silence so sharp it cut deeper. I didn't know it then, but the storm was already building. And soon it would break in a way I could never ignore. It happened on a Saturday. Peter said he had brunch plans with the guys. Nothing unusual, except he spent nearly an hour ironing his shirt, combing his hair with a precision I hadn't seen in months. He even spritzed on cologne, the expensive kind he usually saved for special occasions. "Since when do you dress like that for pancakes?" I teased, trying to keep it light. He smirked, slipping on his watch. What can I say? The guys have standards. I forced a laugh, but inside the unease deepened. Something didn't fit. After he left, I busied myself cleaning the kitchen, folding laundry, anything to stop my mind from spiraling. That's when I saw it. His laptop left open on the counter. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it. Snooping wasn't me. I hated that idea. Hated the kind of paranoia it implied. But when a message popped up in the corner of the screen, my breath caught. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Last time was amazing." From a name I didn't recognize, a woman. I stood frozen, heart thundering. My rational brain screamed, "Close it, Sylvia. Walk away." But my hands moved on their own, pulling up the chat window. What I saw tore something inside me clean in half. There they were, flirty messages, selfies, private jokes, plans for evenings I thought he'd spent with coworkers. Pictures I wish I could unsee. Her calling him baby. Him promising things he hadn't promised me in months. My throat went dry, my palms clammy. I felt like I was falling, except the ground never came. By the time Peter came home, later hours later, giggling into his phone as he kicked off his shoes, I was waiting at the kitchen table, his laptop open in front of me. "Hey," I said, my voice calm but heavy. "We need to talk." He froze mid-step. His eyes darted to the screen. Then, as quickly as fear flashed, his face hardened. "Wow," he said coldly. "So you went through my stuff. That's pathetic, Sylvia." The words stung, but I didn't flinch. "Don't do that. Don't turn this on me. I saw the messages." He let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, come on. It's just fun. Flirting. You're really going to make it a big deal." I stared at him. "You told her last time was amazing. How is that just flirting?" For a split second, something flickered in his eyes, guilt maybe. But it was gone before I could grasp it. His chin lifted, his gaze turned defiant. "You're seriously blowing this out of proportion. She's exciting. She makes me feel alive." "You..." He waved his hand dismissively. "You're safe. Predictable. Boring." The words sliced through me like glass. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just sat in the silence that followed, thick and suffocating. That seemed to irritate him more than if I'd screamed. He pushed harder. "You should be grateful I've even stayed this long. Honestly, Sylvia, you'll never do better than me. Don't even think about leaving. You'd come crawling back in a week." Something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage. It wasn't grief. It was clarity, cold and undeniable. I stood up, sliding my chair back slowly. "You really think that?" He smirked cocky. "I know it." I picked up my keys, slipped my wallet into my bag, and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" he snapped. I paused in the doorway, looked back at him one last time, and said quietly, firmly, "Watch me." His smirk faltered as I closed the door behind me. That night, I didn't take anything else. Not clothes, not toiletries, not the books I loved. I left it all. Just my phone, my wallet, my keys, and a heart, finally free from someone who had chained it with contempt. I drove without thinking, my hands gripping the wheel, the city lights blurring into streaks. My sister Claire answered the door, barefoot mascara smudged from sleep. Sylvia, she whispered, eyes darting to the overnight bag I didn't have. I forced a smile that collapsed almost instantly. Can I crash here? She didn't ask questions. She just pulled me inside, wrapped me in a blanket, and let me collapse on her couch. For the first time in years, the silence felt different. Not suffocating, not sharp, just quiet. I stared at the ceiling that night, my body still buzzing from adrenaline. I'd expected heartbreak, maybe even regret. Instead, I felt strangely hollow, like I'd been emptied out and left with nothing but space. And in that space, I felt peace. The next morning, I blocked Peter's number, deleted his photos, his messages, every trace of him from my phone. It felt like cutting away a tumor, painful but necessary. Claire tried to tiptoe around me. She offered wine, chick flicks, even bad jokes. But I didn't need distraction. What I needed was to remember who I was without him. I began slowly, little things. Taking long walks at sunrise, pulling out my old sketchbook, the one I'd shoved into a drawer years ago, letting paint stain my fingers again. I started cooking meals for myself. Not rushed dinners, squeezed around his schedule, but slow, nourishing recipes that made the apartment smell like rosemary and garlic. Every small act felt like reclaiming a piece of me. My friends noticed. One of them, Nadia, squinted at me over coffee a week later. "You look lighter," she said. "Did you cut your hair or something?" I laughed. "No, just baggage." At work, people commented on my energy. I didn't realize how much Peter's shadow had dulled me until it lifted. Meanwhile, Peter tried to claw his way back. The first text came a few days after I left Peter. "So you're really ignoring me? That's childish." I didn't reply. A week later, Peter. "You left your stuff here. Don't you want it back?" Still, I stayed silent. 2 weeks in, the tone shifted, Peter. Maybe I overreacted. Let's talk. Coffee. My thumb hovered over the screen, but then I remembered his face. His smirk. The venom in his voice when he said I'd never do better. I hit delete. Instead of looking back, I leaned forward into the life I'd almost lost sight of. Yoga classes filled my evenings. Hikes filled my weekends. I even signed up for a pottery class, my hands shaping clay the way I wished I could shape my future. And the more I built myself back, the more I realized something profound. I hadn't just lost Peter. I'd shed the version of me who tolerated less than I deserved. But life has a way of making sure lessons echo. Because just as I found my balance again, whispers about Peter began floating back to me, whispers that would soon remind me karma has sharper teeth than I ever could. It started with whispers. A friend from work mentioned she'd seen Peter out with someone new. Some brunette, she said almost cautiously, like she was testing whether I still cared. I only shrugged. Good for him. But inside my chest burned with a mix of curiosity and pity. Weeks later, the whispers turned into stories. Apparently, Peter's upgrade was already unraveling. He'd bragged about her on social media, parading her like a prize. But beneath the filters and captions, reality told a different story. He never paid for anything. When they went out, she covered the bill. When his car broke down again, she called the tow truck. She bought him new shirts, lent him money, even paid for his Uber rides. When her friends asked why, she laughed nervously. It's just temporary. He's finding his footing. But I knew better. Peter wasn't trying to stand on his own. He never had. Then came the rumors about his wandering eyes. How he flirted openly with women at bars, coworkers, even her friends. If she called him out, he laughed the same dismissive laugh he once used on me. "Don't be so insecure," he told her. That phrase, so familiar, it made my stomach knot, became her prison now. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Life was writing the script for me. 2 months into their picture-perfect Instagram romance, the mask finally slipped. One night at a crowded bar, Peter ended things. Loudly. Cruelly. In front of everyone. "You're too much work," he told her, according to a mutual friend who witnessed it. I never saw this as serious anyway. She stormed out, crying, mascara streaking her cheeks, while Peter ordered another drink and turned his attention to the woman beside him. I heard this secondhand sipping tea at my kitchen table, sunlight streaming across my sketchbook. For the first time in years, I felt no jealousy, no pain, just a quiet satisfaction, not because he was suffering, but because I was free. But Peter wasn't done with me. Almost like clockwork, his messages started again. This time not with arrogance, but desperation. "Peter, Sylvia. I miss us. You were the only one who ever understood me. Peter. I messed up. She wasn't you. She'll never be you. Peter, please can we talk just once? I didn't reply. Then the emails grew longer, more erratic. Some nostalgic, remember that little cafe we loved? I walked past it today and thought of you. Some pleading I can't sleep. I keep thinking about how badly I screwed up. Please don't shut me out. And some bitter. So what you think you're better than me now? Don't flatter yourself. His words came at all hours 2 a.m. dawn during my lunch breaks. But the difference was they didn't pierce me anymore. I read them like lines from an old play, once tragic, now irrelevant. Because the truth was simple, he hadn't been sorry when he betrayed me. He wasn't sorry when he sneered those words in my kitchen. He was only sorry now because karma had finally turned its face toward him. And I had no intention of being his escape from it. The wedding invitation arrived in cream-colored cardstock, my name written in neat cursive across the front. A mutual friend's ceremony. The kind of event I knew Peter would attend. I hesitated only a moment before RSVPing yes. Not out of spite, not to prove anything, but because I finally wanted to show up as the woman I'd become. The vineyard was bathed in late afternoon light, rows of grapes stretching like ribbons under a pale sky. Guests arrived in laughter and silk champagne glasses clinking as music floated in the air. I wore a flowing emerald dress, my hair loose, my smile unforced. Months of yoga and long hikes had reshaped me, not just my body, but the way I carried it. For the first time in years, I walked into a room not as someone's partner, but as myself. And people noticed. Compliments brushed against me like petals in the wind. Sylvia, you look radiant. Wow, haven't seen you this happy in ages. It felt like stepping into sunlight after too long in the shade. Then I saw him, Peter leaning against the bar, drink in hand. He wore a suit that probably cost more than it should have, but his posture betrayed him. Shoulders hunched, eyes darting, a thinness around his mouth that looked like regret. The moment his gaze found me, it faltered. Just for a second, but enough. I greeted a few friends first, giving him time to squirm. Then, as if on cue, he walked over, plastering on a smile. Well, well, he said, tone casual but strained. Look who decided to show up. You clean up nicely. I tilted my head polite. Thanks. He sipped his drink, studying me. So, you've been ignoring me. Not very mature, Sylvia. I let the silence stretch, then shrugged. I've been busy. He scoffed lightly. Busy, right? So still single. You must miss me. We had good times, didn't we? I looked at him, really looked. This was the man who once told me I'd never do better, who smirked when he admitted betraying me. Now standing here fishing for a reaction, he looked small. No, I said finally, voice steady. I don't miss you. His smile cracked. You don't mean that. You're just trying to hurt me. I shook my head. No, Peter. I mean it. I don't miss the digs. I don't miss wondering who you were texting at midnight. I don't miss being treated like a placeholder. He shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. I was angry. I didn't mean half the things I said. Yes, you did, I countered softly, firmly. You looked me in the eye and told me I'd never do better. That wasn't anger. That was who you were. He tried to hold my gaze, but his eyes darted away. I leaned in just enough for only him to hear. You know the funny thing. You were right about one thing. I did do better. Not with someone else, with myself. My life is better without you. I am better without you. His mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time, his silence was mine to control. I straightened, offering him the same polite smile I'd give a stranger. Then I turned, greeting another guest, who pulled me into conversation, leaving him standing there, glass in hand, stunned, irrelevant. Later that night, as the music swelled and couples twirled under string lights, I caught a glimpse of him again, alone by the bar, watching me laugh, radiant, untouchable. And for the first time, I realized I no longer felt bitterness. I felt nothing. The night wound down slowly, laughter echoing under the vineyard's canopy of string lights. Couples drifted toward the dance floor, their shadows swaying softly against the glow. I stepped outside for a moment, the cool air brushing against my skin. The stars stretched overhead, vast and unbothered, like they'd been watching me this whole time, through the heartbreak, the silence, the rebuilding. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not the fragile kind that could be blown away, but a grounded peace. A wholeness I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I thought back to this girl I used to be, the one who made excuses for Peter's late nights, who laughed off his insults to keep the peace, who stared at the ceiling wondering if she was enough. And then I thought of the woman I'd become, the one who walked away, who rebuilt piece by piece, who stood in front of him and didn't tremble. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about proving him wrong or waiting for karma to settle scores. It was about freedom, because Peter had been wrong about me. I did do better, not by finding someone new to fill the spaces he hollowed out, but by learning to fill them myself. Better was waking up in the morning without anxiety gnawing my stomach. Better was sketching until dawn colors smearing across my fingertips. Better was laughing with friends without worrying about whose texts were lighting up his phone. Better was knowing my worth wasn't tethered to someone else's validation. As the music swelled inside, I glanced back through the glass doors. Peter was still at the bar, staring down at his drink alone in a room full of people. Once upon a time, I might have pitied him, but now he wasn't my problem. He wasn't even my thought. I turned back to the vineyard, to the stars, to the future, stretching out like an open road, and I smiled, because I hadn't just left him behind. I had left behind the version of myself who believed I needed him to be whole. And as I walked away that night, heels crunching softly against the gravel, I realized the truest victory wasn't that he'd lost me. It was that I'd finally found myself.